Welcome, everybody, to the Cinema Club podcast. It's been a minute, but we're really excited to be back and doing this. We're going to be doing things just a little bit differently, but this week is a whopper of a film. It's Chris Nolan's Tenet.
We all believe we've run into the burning building. But until we feel that heat, we can never know. You do. You chose to die instead of giving up your colleagues. That test you passed? Not everybody does. Welcome to the afterlife.
To do what I do, I need some idea of the threat we face.
As I understand it, we're trying to prevent World War III.
Nuclear holocaust.
No. Something worse.
All I have for you is a word. Tenet. It'll open the right doors. Some of the wrong ones, too.
You have to start looking at the world in a new way.
And try to understand it. Feel it.
What'll happen here?
Hasn't happened yet.
It is definitely my favorite movie of the year. I mean, I know this year's been a little bit different because of COVID, but it is such a good movie just in general that I would put this in probably one of my top 5. I know that's saying a lot, but like it's really good. So I'm really excited to talk about it today. And I'm as excited to talk about this because I have 2 guests on this week, and he's kind of becoming a staple of the podcast, but we have Chris Amick back again. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Nick, happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me today.
Absolutely happy to. And I mean, you're kind of the person I most want to talk about this film, just because like you and I have been talking about this movie really since Christopher Nolan started teasing this in theaters and stuff. And so finally it's happened. And so I'm really glad to have you on. And our other very special guest is, Chris's little bro, Elliot. So, Elliot, welcome to the podcast for the first time.
Hey, thank you. Big fan. Happy to be here.
The movie, as I said, is Tenet, and it's written and directed by Chris Nolan. It's been a pet project of his for many, many years now. It's a 71. I was very surprised. It's only a 71 on Rotten Tomatoes, and it has a whopping runtime of 2 hours and 30 minutes, and he needed that two hours, 30 minutes to get all that's in it, because, man, is this a movie that is just super, super, like, packed full of action, drama, suspense. It's to me, it's the most Christopher Nolan film of Christopher Nolan films that he's ever made.
Absolutely. It's a jam-packed ride, nonstop. It holds your attention for the entire runtime because you have to. You have to be completely zoned into this film to have any kind of comprehension of what's happening.
Exactly. And I will say this about Christopher Nolan. One thing that he and I have very much in common is kind of this obsession with time. And you see that through pretty much most of the rest of his movies, except maybe the Dark Knight trilogy. But especially with films like Memento, Inception, I mean, that has more to do with dreams, but also time in that as well. Interstellar, The Prestige even. So it just brings all of that kind of obsession with time and really messes with it. This film, he teased it from the beginning, saying that this was going to be a heist movie. And though I would categorize it as a heist movie, it is unlike any other heist movie there is. It really is a time heist, and it is just a genius, a masterpiece of Nolan's films, I think. So with that, let's go straight into the synopsis. We have a lot to cover here, so let's get into it. So the movie starts out in Kiev, Ukraine, as an unnamed operative, aka the protagonist, who's played by John David Washington. He assists in a CIA assignment to foil an opera siege and retrieve a stolen cache of plutonium. During the operation, the plutonium is found to be fake, but the protagonist is saved by a masked gunman with a red string on his back. And I say a red string on his back because that's going to come back later. So the protagonist is then abducted and threatened with torture until he bites down on an apparent suicide pill, like a cyanide pill, before revealing any information. So I thought that just the beginning there, the whole opening, it starts with the tuning of the orchestra. And it's such like an awesome intro because this really is an opera of a movie. It plays like an opera from start to end. It's such like a big spectacle kind of film. And I thought it was such an awesome thing just to start out the whole entire movie with that tuning of the orchestra.
Yeah, this film doesn't waste any time. Right off the bat, you're in the midst of it and you're already trying to figure out what the hell's going on. It's incredibly fast paced from the get-go. We kind of, obviously get our protagonist right off the bat, and you're still like putting the pieces together as the protagonist is taking that cyanide pill. We're still like, at least I was still processing the events of what just occurred. And I think it's on purpose a little bit. As you mentioned, you have that, certain character that with that bullet going in reverse at the very beginning. It's right there in front of the audience, but we don't fully really process what's going on until later in the film.
I barely even noticed the first time around seeing that bullet go in reverse, but you see just a hint of that before even anything happens, and it just puts you straight into that, holy crap, what is that? What was that?
Yeah, and then you're like trying to figure out, okay, well, this is obviously a team and there's a double crossing that potentially happens. To be honest with you, I'm still not even sure what happened fully in the beginning of that film. I was talking about it with my brother and I'm like, so what? We were watching that scene again last night. We're like, what exactly happened here? But I think he got double crossed, and then that's why he's taking that cyanide pill on the train wrecks.
Right. I think it's interesting, like you said, like there's all this happening at the beginning. It's kind of chaotic almost, where you have all this action, but in the midst of that, like right off the bat, it's these small details you're trying to pick up on that are so important throughout the entire film, can really easily be missed, like the orange or red zipper, the bullet flying backwards, like these little things in the midst of all this chaos that like really are pointing to important things down the road in the film.
And this is why I think this film is just so great, and especially the timing of it being really a COVID era film, being a type of film that came out. It came out in theaters, but it came out also digital release as well. And it to me, that's such an important kind of detail in this, because there are so many details. You will not get it the first time through. You're going to have to watch this 3 or 4 times just to get it. And that's why I think this is just such a masterpiece of a film, because you have such little details that if you miss just a second of this thing, you're going to miss a key plot point down the road. Usually you have a twist, like a twist ending that maybe in other films you had maybe 1 or 2 details, but there are details in literally every single second of this film.
Yeah, I think that's Christopher Nolan at his finest.
So upon waking, the protagonist learns that the pill was actually a test to test his loyalty. He's recruited into a secret organization, given only the information that the word Tenet is a cross-fingered gesture that will open many doors for him. The protagonist infiltrates this facility where he learns that in the future, technology has been developed that allows objects to have their entropy reversed and move backwards through time. To demonstrate this, a scientist presents him with bullets that fire in reverse. Now let's get down to probably what I think is the most genius bit bit of this movie, and that is the filmmaking in and of itself. You have what you think is reversed film to show this reversal, this reverse of entropy, to show what the time travel aspect of this is. But at the same time, Christopher Nolan does something really interesting, and he plays with it throughout the rest of the film, where you have this reversed film, but there are aspects of that reverse that also go forward in time. So you have on screen both things happening at the same time. A perfect example of this is a fight scene that comes out in the Oslo airport later, that you have these little details like the kicking of a gun while you also see the character moving in reverse. It's just, I don't know how he did it. I mean, they say that there was less CGI effects in this movie than even a rom-com. So how he was able to do that without CGI is just mind-blowing to me. It's going to take me years to figure out how he did that.
Yeah, I mean, as I was watching it, it does add another layer to the confusion. Like, wait, how is this happening? I did get the physical copy with the special features, so I'm planning to pop that thing in and watch more of the details about how they actually put this thing together, because it is incredible. I know John David Washington, he was kind of speaking in an interview about how filming this project was unlike any other project he'd ever been on, just because of that aspect. Elliot and I were theorizing here, this is a little out there, but that the scientist that our protagonist meets is the actual scientist that later on creates in the future what she's learning about right now. Because there's only one female scientist mentioned throughout the entire, there's obviously more scientists out there, but I'm just saying, working with this subject matter, there's only one female scientist we meet. So I think that is a potential clue Christopher left us.
And another clue to that, I've thought of that myself and heard that theory a couple times now in the last couple days when I've been doing my research. And another thing that shows that is the fact that this is such a secret organization, and it is in the sequence of things, how they happen is he gets out from that windmill that he has been staying on for a few days, kind of getting him to understand what actually this whole world that he's been introduced to. The thing he goes to from there is straight from that windmill to that scientist. And so it is as if in this organization, the Tenet organization, the first thing that everybody that's introduced there goes, the first place they go to is this scientist. And she's their first point of contact. And she's really kind of the only scientist, that we're introduced to, but in my opinion, the only scientist who actually knows what is going on here. So she can be the only scientist who knows about this, that she's the only person that can be that scientist in the future that actually brings about the Armageddon type events.
Yeah, exactly. And he would later on go on to create it. And that's just kind of another potential beautiful layer to this film.
One of the millions of layers in this film.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Additional potential layer to add on that I really liked Elliot and I were talking about. But yeah.
So tracking the metal from which the reverse bullets are made, the protagonist infiltrates the compound of an Indian billionaire with the aid of Neil, played by Robert Pattinson, a British intelligence agent. He learns that it is in fact the billionaire's wife, Priya, who knows what is actually happening. Priya tells the protagonist that the time reversing technology is under the control of a Russian arms dealer, Andrei Sater, played by Kenneth Branagh, who is in communication with an unknown agency from the future. Now, this is the first moment of the film where we finally see like the immense spectacle of action that Christopher Nolan is known for. That whole bungee jump up to that building was something I've never seen before. It's one of the coolest things I've seen before. And this is the starting point of the movie. Like, this is a Tom Cruise style stunt action scene here that we see, something that Tom Cruise would do. And it's the first thing that we see.
Yeah, and I was kind of thinking about this too as I was rewatching it a little bit last night. As Tenet continually shows us, things are always moving forward and backward, and typically bungee jumping, as we typically look at it, is looked at coming down. They were shooting up. So just one other layer to Christopher Nolan's film.
I hadn't even caught that. That is such an awesome little detail. Another little detail that went kind of over my head the first time was we start to see signs that Neil knows a little bit more than he's coming on to. Like in their first meeting, he knows the drink that the protagonist likes to have, and he tried to like throw it off. And also he knows he has a little bit of an obsession with time. We see as well, in that he says that he's a quantum. No, what was it? Yeah, like he was like a quantum physicist, and he's like really obsessed with time and all that kind of stuff. Like he went to school for quantum physics. So there's these little details, like these little hints that Neil kind of knows a little bit more than he's coming on to at first.
Yeah, I do kind of touching on Neil. I feel like obviously this entire film is very interesting, has a lot of different aspects to it, but I feel like Neil, when looking back at this film, is the most interesting character in this film that Christopher made. And yes, he just has so many different layering pieces that are attached to him and that come along with him. A lot of unanswered stuff, obviously, but yes.
So in order to get Sator, the protagonist approaches his estranged wife, Kat. Kat tells the protagonist that Sator has her under his control due to a forged painting that she gave to him. The protagonist tries to win the trust of Kat by crashing a cargo plane into a warehouse and retrieving the painting from it within a free port at Oslo Airport. During the operation, however, the protagonist and Neil are attacked by two masked men, one of whom is using a time-reversing gun. The attacker escapes before the protagonist is able to find out who he is. So that's a lot. A lot happened in a very short amount of time. So let's get into that. The first thing I wanted to say is about that painting. So one detail that I don't know if you guys have heard this yet about, but Tenet actually was named and came from an ancient an ancient Latin 5-word palindrome that is called the Rhodes Square. It has the words Sator, Arepo, Tenet, and then turns it around with opera and Rhodes. And those 5 words are very key, and Christopher Nolan plays with this thing throughout the entire thing. You have the opera house that happens at the beginning. You have Sator, who is the main villain of the movie. You have Arepo, which is actually the name of the Goya painting, of the forger of this Goya painting that Kat is in that she has, that she gave to Sator, who then that painting becomes the power that he has over her. And then you have Tenet, which is the secret organization. And finally you have Rhodes, which we'll get into a little bit later, but it's kind of the security company at the Oslo airport. And so that's just such an awesome, like, that's what this movie came from. It named the film. It was throughout the entire film. And it's, again, another piece of that layering that Christopher Nolan so expertly weaves into the story of this film. And then we get to the Oslo airport scene.
Oh, yeah. I was going to mention, kind of backing it back up. Back to when protagonist is meeting with Kat, and then the Russians come on in, and I just thought so when the protagonist walks into the back of the kitchen and he's like, "Hey, I ordered hot sauce with my meal." I was like, I didn't expect comedy in this film. All right, Christopher.
Also, another thing that's kind of comedic, but also really cringy in the same fight scene was he used a cheese grater as one of his weapons, and just like grates off the side of that guy's face. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, I was watching it with my family. We're all like, oh my God. Like, it was a huge reaction. So, and I also thought, Kat's sitting in the car, sad, because she knows he's being all beat up, at least minimum, in that kitchen. And then he walks out into the alleyway, like straightens his suit up a little bit. And then she says something like, "Oh, he doesn't always get his way," or something like that. And I think that's when Kat really starts to potentially believe that John David Washington's character can actually potentially help her drop in there was, Neil's getting shown about this airport, vault by this guy, this custodian guy. And he's like, oh, there's only 10 seconds to get out, yada, yada, yada. Then Neil's like, well, what about you guys? And the tour guide is basically, oh, well, our top priority is you. And Neil's like, blimey. And like, I just don't know why, but that moment was actually very hilarious, very dry, just dropped out of nowhere for me. But those little things I think really added to the characters a little bit and made them more human to us, because this film doesn't have a whole lot of backstory for anybody, as Tenet itself as an organization encourages. But those little moments I think made us, or at least me as an audience member, really grow to like our main characters in this film.
And one thing I wanted to say about that was I found Neil, like you said, Neil's character was a lot more interesting as a character than John David Washington's character, the protagonist. And I think they did that for a reason, because Neil really is the person, like the key and vital point to the entire story. And there's so much more of his backstory that we are able to glean from the story. And we hardly know who the character of John David Washington's protagonist is. And that's the point. We're not supposed to know until the very end. And even then, we still don't know, where did he come from? What is his background? Why was he a CIA operative? Why was he willing to bite down that pill? We don't know that. And I don't think we need to.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where you kind of leave the audience wanting more, but I think it's okay in this scenario, because that's what the characters want themselves. They want to know what's going on.
To me, the airport scene was just such to me, a very pivotal moment in the movie, just because I feel they're trying to breach and reach the, center of this whole security system.
Well, also it is the central scene that we spend the most time on, whether we're going forward or backward in time. It has the most screen time of the entire movie.
Yes. And I think it's very interesting because as you're watching it the first time in the movie, to me, it's you're almost, the breaching in, the breaking in, all of a sudden he's fighting this guy in reverse. You're super confused. And then, to me, it's layering on the confusion, right? And then later on in the movie, we all of a sudden come back to this scene. We're almost watching it backwards. And all of a sudden, but even though it's we're in rewind, it's all of a sudden unraveling all of these questions and mysteries we've had. And I just thought that was a super cool way in which it was filmed, in which the story was told. Exactly.
We see things in forward and we see things in reverse, and we're just what's going on here? To go even further into that Oslo airport scene, that whole entire sequence is to date one of the most expensive sequences in cinema history, because he actually did that with a real airplane. That wasn't a miniature. That wasn't something that was just done through CGI. That was real. He got a legit airplane and crashed it into the side of an airplane hangar. That was for real. It was real explosions. Everything there was real. It just goes to show how much Christopher Nolan is just, number one, a master in his craft as a filmmaker and a producer, but also how much he values reality. He wasn't going to do that on a miniature set because it wouldn't look real. He wasn't going to do that as CGI because that wouldn't look real to him. What is seen in the camera is most important. From the beginning, it is the most truest form of the filmmaking art form. And to me, that is the sign of a true artist as a filmmaker. And I love him for actually doing that.
I just think it's funny because when I was watching it, I hadn't known that. And when it came to the scene of the plane, I was like, wow, that's a big plane. And then later on, when I realized that it was real, I was like, that's insane. Because even just not even realizing that in the movie, I'm like, that is a big plane to be crashing into a building.
But the other part of it that I thought was genius on Christopher Nolan's bit is that in the time coming up to the release of Tenet, I know there was a huge marketing campaign around the fact that this was a real stunt, that they actually got a real plane to do this. And they were like playing up to be this huge thing. But then when I saw it in the film, I was like, wait, this is still within the first hour. Is this not the biggest thing of the movie? And it wasn't the biggest thing of the movie. And I was like, holy crap, how much bigger can we be if crashing the plane into a side of a hangar isn't the biggest stunt of the film?
Exactly.
So let's keep going forward. The protagonist returns to Kat, asking for her help in meeting Sator. Kat arranges for the protagonist to attend a dinner party hosted by Sator, but the oligarch does not trust the protagonist. The protagonist bargains for his life by offering to steal weapons-grade plutonium for Sator. So this is the first time we see Sator, and I was I did not look up who before I watched the film who was playing who in this film, and so it took me by complete surprise to see Kenneth Branagh in this film, and he just played such a perfect antagonist and villain in this film. And it's when we see him down in the lower decks of the boat that we see him, that he actually is able to play with this reverse time. And when he actually picks up the bars of gold from that vault thing, and we're like, holy crap, this guy actually knows more than he's coming on. Like, we think of him as this like guy who kind of knows what's happening with the plutonium, and that he was a arms manufacturer and dealer, but no, he's actually even more integral to the story because he actually knows how the reverse time works.
I was just going to say again, I think that was another interesting plot line that again is building or destructing, however you want to look at it, but it's playing around with Kat's trust in the protagonist again right there. And then we later find out, if he had died, what might have happened there in that scenario. But yeah, I feel like you're along with the ride here with our protagonist, and you're just like, oh my God, this is what's happening. You're discovering that with the main character. I think that's really important.
So we go on to see that the protagonist succeeds in stealing the plutonium from an armored car, but is interrupted by a time-reversed vehicle. The protagonist uncovers Sator and his gang's plot. They are operating a temporal pincer movement in which they move both forwards and backwards in time by means of entering a temporal style, following the operation and then moving backwards through time. At the temporal junction, Sator shoots Kat and leaves her before reinforcements arrive to secure the temporal style. The protagonist is then able to follow Sator back through the temporal style, where he turns out to be the driver of that time-reversed car from before. The protagonist rescues Kat, but is able to prevent Sator from acquiring the plutonium. So this sequence was one of my favorite sequences, number one, of the film, and also as a Christopher Nolan file, it is one of my favorite sequences of Christopher Nolan's because it calls back to my favorite sequence and my favorite movie of all time, which is The Dark Knight. This whole sequence that he does with the cars is in direct correlation and style that he shot the Joker chase scene. He does it with kind of the same camera movements, with the same kind of styles, with the same kind of vehicles, using these huge vehicles to kind of box in things and all that kind of stuff. With explosions, with all kind of grandiose things happening. And it's just so expertly done by an expert in his field, being Christopher Nolan. And the other part of it is finally playing with this temporal pincer movement, which comes back later. But this temporal pincer, I wanted to talk about that just a little bit in and of itself, because we finally see how this forwarding and reversing in time actually works, because it actually culminates in a central point of history. We have two central points of this whole time travel movie, being this first one and then one later on at the the climax of the film, but we see how it actually works. We first see in the red current time, and that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later, the color of the film, but we see on the red side going forward in time, the blue side of this temporal style, Kenneth Branagh is talking in reverse. And we finally find out that he went into the style going one way and came out the other, and we can hear them talking in reverse and in current time to each other. And at first you don't understand what's going on until it actually brings you to that point when they enter the style and they come out of the style. And it's so expertly done that it doesn't make sense, and then it makes sense 2 minutes later. And the other part of it, I'll get to you, Chris, I'll get to you, is that the temporal pincer has to do with, or comes down to the detail of the name of the movie, which is Tenet. Tenet, the word Tenet, when it comes back to that Latin palindrome, Tenet is what happens when two 10-minute time increments meet. So this whole going for one 10-minute going forward and one 10-minute going backwards. And so what the temporal pincer is basically 10 minutes. In the film, it is literally pretty much 10 minutes in the film and 10 minutes in time. What happens when we see that car first coming in back in reverse on while they're doing that whole operation with the trucks, when you see that car coming backwards to the time that Kenneth Branagh goes through that, or when you see the car coming backward and you eventually see that car coming backward was Kenneth Branagh's character coming back in time and stealing the piece of that algorithm, that is 10 minutes from the time he actually enters the turnstile in the movie and in his time. So I think that's just such an awesome little detail that just puts this whole thing to a whole nother level.
To me, I just thought, you were talking, it's like we finally get to see, this reverse in time. I just thought it was cool how using nothing but the manipulation of time, like Christopher Nolan basically created this entire different world in the same, it's like they're having to wear oxygen because of the reverse breathing, everything you're seeing, birds, wind, waves, all in reverse, heat turning into cold instead.
The whole bit of Christopher Nolan is that much of an OCD person and an OCD writer and director that the whole world of going backwards works from a physics standpoint. And we see him working with physics not only in this movie, but he does that also in movies like Interstellar, where we get what actually happens with the black hole. And here he actually goes through the scientific process of what it would be like. He shows us that scientific process of what it would be like going backwards in time.
Right. Which is something that just you never would think of until you see it happen. And it was just crazy to watch happen and have that realization of just the detail and the creativity of all that. I just thought was really cool. Along with that, I just thought, this whole scene that, you're talking about, I just thought the music that was put to it was just so, I don't know, it just really added to the entire frame of the scene. I thought it was really cool.
Which brings me to the music, because I did want to touch on the music a little bit. So Christopher Nolan has been working for the longest time with Hans Zimmer, creating these awesome scores for his films. And Hans Zimmer is such a genius. I compare him as the Mozart of our time, and comparing him alongside the John Williams composers of our time. And what's very interesting about this film in particular, and this score, is this is one of the first films Christopher Nolan has not used Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer did not make the soundtrack for this film. It was actually Ludwig Göransson, and you may recognize Ludwig. He's the up and coming Hans Zimmer and John Williams of our generation, because he actually is the guy who made the music for the show Mandalorian.
That's why it's so good. Okay.
Oh, very interesting. Did not know that. Wow.
And what Ludwig Göransson does so geniusly in this is he takes the style and inspiration from Hans Zimmer to such a degree that you would not be able to really think of this as not a Hans Zimmer score. Like, it's so similar to a Hans Zimmer score, but it's not. And the other part that's so interesting about the score is that the score was created after COVID started. Everything was filmed before COVID started, but the score was created and composed during quarantine. And what Ludwig Jorgensen did was he actually, instead of recording all the orchestra together, was he had each individual musician record from their home, and then he put it all together in the end and recorded basically and edited basically on a laptop because of COVID.
That's insane.
That's incredible.
That's incredible.
Yeah. One quick note while we're on this scene of events and the soundtrack, and I didn't catch this the first time around, but I think the soundtrack was reversed when protagonist is captured. I think it is.
You're right. It is.
Okay. Because, and yeah, when I was watching that scene originally, I was like, wait, where did the Russians come from? They just dished the Russians, now they're back. Like, I was legitimately so confused. But then, yeah, we saw that they went back. They reversed it, and that's that the pincer movement, basically, to summarize, is what happened. It all made sense. But yeah, as you were kind of mentioning, as those big vehicles are coming together to, block in that truck, it did feel very familiar for me. But like, not like, oh, every movie does this. It's not one of those things. But like, it felt very familiar what was happening, and I couldn't place it. So I'm really glad you shared that.
And the other part of that is really interesting. If you go back and look at it, this is like a really like technical thing. But if you go back and watch it again and watch when when the protagonist finally goes back in time for the first time, and we enter that reverse entropy world. If you look at it closely and have it with this knowledge, and I may spoil it for everybody, but you can actually know that whole sequence of him moving backwards was done reversed. They reversed the film, everything, even when it looks like he's moving forward. If you look at it like really closely, it's all done in true backwards. He didn't try to do that opposite, like try to go forward and backward at the same time. All that was all backwards, true in camera.
This movie gets just better and better.
Finally, let's get to also what I wanted to talk about this sequence. This sequence is like the biggest sequence of the film, I think, and that was the red-blue temporal room with the temporal style. And the whole use of color in this film, Christopher Nolan is a master of color in his use of color in all the rest of his movies, but he uses color in such a genius way to show the forward and reverse entropy of time. Red signifies a moving forward in time, and you see that not only in the lighting patterns in some sequences of the film, like especially this sequence, but also in the wardrobe. You see Kat's dresses. She's wearing blue and red dresses to show that one version of Kat is moving forward and one version of Kat is moving backwards. And same goes with the blue. Blue is moving backwards in time. It is the reverse entropy of the film. And you also see this red-blue in the blue lapels that the soldiers wear on their uniforms in the last sequence of the film. The officers and the soldiers that are moving forward in time are wearing red lapels. The red team is moving forward in time, and the blue team is moving backwards in time, and he uses that throughout the whole film. I mean, even down to the smallest little detail of Kenneth Branagh being a natural redhead. We see in the last sequence of the boat. The rest of the film, he doesn't really bring out that red in Kenneth Branagh's hair, but in that last boat sequence, we see him bring a little bit more of those red tones in his hair color, and the skin tones on Kat as she's the person moving backwards. She went to the back and now she's coming forward. She's the past version of her that she saw jump off the boat. Her skin tones are a little bit more blue and washed out. I mean, it is that detailed.
It's incredible because I was noticing the red and blue tooth thing but in different ways. Some it's obviously throughout this whole film, because as we're sharing, at the very end with that pincer movement, red team, blue team, they utilize those armbands, and their watch faces are either red or blue. They either even come out of red or blue shipping containers when they actually are going out. But then even the very beginning of the film, because I was rewatching the film last night a little bit, I watched like the first half again. But the Warner Bros. Logo is blue, and the Syncope logo, I think, is red. Warner Bros. Is red, Syncope is blue. But yeah, the interrogation room uses these colors. And then when Neil and the protagonist enter the turnstile room at the airport, those two doors, there's a red square and there's a blue square indicating which direction those rooms are going in. But yeah, it's just, I kind of like that you shared what you were noticing, because I noticed completely different things, but it's throughout this entire film, those two colors.
So Sator is revealed to be dying from an inoperable pancreatic cancer and has turned homicidal, believing that if he is to die, he would prefer to spread death to all humanity. It is revealed that Sator is not looking for plutonium, but in fact some form of a future algorithm which can cause the entropy time direction of the world to reverse, or that being a potential huge nuclear explosion in the world that actually makes time reverse. The algorithm will be created in the future by a future scientist, as you said, that scientist we saw earlier, and as a way to turn back time since the future Earth is ruined by decisions made by present-day humans. Sator plans to use the algorithm as a doomsday device that will reverse entropy for the entire Earth, killing everything on it. He plans to return at a point in time where he was happy with Kat and then set off the device, which is connected to a dead man's switch linked to his heartbeat. The protagonists, Neil and Kat, follow Sator backwards in time, traveling in a cargo ship container back to Oslo. The trio infiltrate the Freeport Art Storage Facility once again, where they enter another temporal style that allows Kat to move forwards through time again and have her gunshot wound healed. The protagonist soon discovers he was, in fact, the masked assailant during the first operation at the warehouse. Now, the one thing I wanted to say about this masked operative in the warehouse, going back to that Oslo Freeport airplane incident, we first see that there are bullets that reverse, but then when we come to this scene and we realize that it was the protagonist in that black mask that actually shot at the past version of the protagonist. What I heard a lot of people kind of have a problem with was this fact that why did he shoot at himself? Like, if he shot at himself and hit himself, then his past self would cease to exist, and meaning that the current him would then cease to exist as well. The reason being for that, and this is just my own thought, is that the reason he started shooting at the past version of himself was to get the gun completely to empty. He wasn't trying to shoot himself. He was actually clearly trying to shoot away from him in order to make sure that the magazine was empty, so that the past version of him actually wouldn't then pick the gun up and use it on him, then reversing the future him, making this whole thing not even happen, as we'll find out later, because he is the whole reason this whole thing is happening. We'll get there.
Yeah, I think when you're watching it that second time, you can clearly see from his perspective that he is intentionally missing, and I think he even like unloads it and throws it away or something like that at the very end, which I think his same character does at the very beginning of the film. He like unloads a clip and throws it away.
The beginning character, what he does is he picks up a disassembled part of the gun and then assembles the gun during the sequence.
I just enjoyed watching the whole thing from the inverse, or whatever you want to call it, the backward approach to things, and how Neil knew all this was going to happen from the get-go, because he obviously saw the protagonist with his mask off beforehand. And it's like, oh, well, like I took care of him. That's what he said when we're moving forward. But obviously we got to see that he knew something was going to happen. He knew they were going to end up back at the airport hangar to begin with.
One thing I did want to say about this whole sequence was there was a couple shots in here and a couple scenes that blew me away. The first being that shot, that far away helicopter shot of the boat as it's going reverse in time, but he is doing push-ups in forward time or pull-ups in forward time. That blew me away. I don't know how they did it. I think that may have been some of that CGI, but it looked flawless.
Yeah, and it was kind of referencing as he's passing by those windmills. Earlier in the movie, he was doing the same push-ups in those windmills, and now he's passing by those windmills doing the same push-ups again.
And also, one thing that you should note in this one detail of all time travel is never meet your past self when you're doing time travel. He knows his past so much, and the fact that he did not come out of that windmill, that those are the windmills he was in before. And while he's passing by those windmills, he is actually passing a version of himself within hundreds of feet. And he knows that the past version of himself never came out of it. So he is just fine to be out there doing the pull-ups out in the open because he knows the past version of himself isn't going to come and see him.
Right.
The other shot that blew me away was seeing that huge temporal turnstile and having all those people just go into it that was on the boat to get everybody to go forward and reverse in time of that team. It just blew me away to see a set piece that big, and that I thought it was really a beautiful set piece. That was another thing, was the direction of the machines. So you knew that any machine that was vertical, that was turning vertically, was the good guys of the film. They were in control of that temporal turnstile, while the machines that turned horizontally were owned by Sator, his team, the bad guys of the movie. And so when you see the facility at the Oslo airport, that is a one that turns horizontally. So the reason, like when they came back to save Kat, the reason they didn't just go to that turnstile was because that was controlled by the bad guys. They didn't know if they had gone back into the rest of the facility instead of going away from the airplane, going to the boat to reverse time. That turnstile in the airport, they didn't know that wasn't being controlled by bad guys. They didn't know that there weren't bad guys in there controlling that. So that's why they didn't do that. That could have been easier, but they didn't because it was a bad guy's stronghold.
I was going to mention, as kind of going back to that car sequence, Neil's like, I'm calling in the cavalry, basically. And we're all like, it's a very quick second. And we're like, okay, what does that mean? And then we see Neil knows, again, way too much. And he has his whole team ready to go.
Right, because up to that point, we didn't know Neil knew anything. We thought that the protagonist was telling Neil about this time travel, how it worked, when really, in reality, Neil knew more than the protagonist. And it's at that point that we finally see, oh, wait, Neil's been on it this whole entire time.
Right. And I think Neil does a good job of telling our protagonist that, because they're with Kat when Kat's like in bed or whatever, and Neil's kind of going over some information, and he does the hand signal for Tenet, trust, and all that kind of stuff. So protagonist can know he truly can trust what's going on here with Neil.
And finally, we get to the end of the movie where even further back in time, a military operation is launched whereby the protagonist and Neil attempt to retrieve the Doomsday device from an abandoned Soviet-era city while Kat is with her husband on his yacht, aiming to prevent him from killing himself before the Doomsday device is retrieved. Kat then kills Sator while the protagonist and Neil are able to retrieve the Doomsday device in time. During this operation, the protagonist notices that Neil has a red string on his back and that he was therefore the masked man who saved him not only during the opera siege, but also then let himself be killed to save the protagonist from being shot. The protagonist then saves Kat from being killed by Priya after all of the film's events, revealing that he has been the leader of Tenet operations for 2 years in the past. He's been the person who created Tenet from the beginning. This sequence and the end of the movie and the climax of the movie was one of the coolest and the best uses of this whole reverse and forward and reverse time filmmaking that Christopher Nolan did. I mean, it was not like, I could not tell whether the film was going forward or if it was going backwards, because you had people going forwards and backwards in time during this entire sequence. The use of using the reverse time explosions, making because right from the beginning, when you see the helicopters come in, you see the helicopters going forward, yet the missiles are going backwards. Like the entire sequence is so just mind-blowing and mind-boggling to me that I'm going to have to see this thing a bunch of times to just figure out what's going on.
Yeah, well, even with Neil's story, like he ends up like going back and doing this the same 10-minute sequence of events like 3 times, I think, which is really interesting. I kind of really had to sit down and after the film and map this out and figure out when he was jumping in, jumping out, what he's doing. But yeah, my kind of question was, I think it was a sweet revenge for Kat here at the end here. But I know that Sater, I think is his name, he was planning to take that cyanide pill. But was that actually a cyanide pill is my question, I guess, that I have maybe for you guys, because very beginning of the film, we find out same organization had those pills and they were fakes according to the information we had. So did their protagonist have something in mind the whole time, regardless of Kat succeeded or not, I guess. One other thing about Sater that I found really interesting is, he has pancreatic cancer, which is presumably caused by spending too much time around nuclear materials as he was younger. And
not only spending time around nuclear materials when he was younger, that started this whole thing off from the beginning. But that is the site that the final battle takes place. That was the same exact nuclear site that he had found the first part of the algorithm.
Right, and it took me like a little while to process fully what was going on. They were basically setting it all up. So timing wise, it looked like Sater succeeded in what he wanted to do, but they were getting that out of there before that building collapsed. And it clicked for me about halfway through the mission. I was like, oh, this was happening. I was continually playing catch up for me, but yeah, the sequence was crazy.
I think that this final scene, there's so much complexity with you're already so impressed by the complexity of the reverse and forward meshing together, and then on top of that, like you mentioned Neil, I just thought the way he's reversing time during it. And then after the entire scene, he still has to go back in order for all of that to come together and work, because he's the guy who unlocked the gate to begin with.
Not only unlocked the gate, but also sacrificed himself. He knew that he was going back to get shot in the head to save the protagonist.
Right. I just think, I don't know, that entire scene that just brought such an added layer of complexity and storytelling to it that I just thought was incredible.
One theory, and it's a theory that I personally believe is to be true, is that Neil is actually Kat's son.
Yes, Elliot and I were talking about this.
There are a lot of details that really show this to be true and make it pretty convincing theory, because throughout the entire film, he has known what is going to happen ever since he was a little boy, because his mother told him what was going to happen, so that then he could seek out John David Washington's character to then start this whole process where then John David Washington's character then creates Tenet. So actually what happens is Kat's son, Neil, started Tenet because he got John David Washington to start Tenet. It's just all just so wrapped up in and of itself that there is no way that Neil is not Kat's son, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, my take on it was that in the very ending scene, protagonist, I think the quote is, ties up loose ends, kind of for protagonist at the very end. He's like, so how close are you thinking about going back to hang out with Kat, basically? And then protagonist is like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then he's like, not even a little bit? Are you sure? Like, I think he had that question that he wanted to know before the end there. And then I think the movie also, throughout the whole film, hints at it. Neil is taking care of Kat when she's shot. There's a bajillion people better qualified than Neil to do that. That's his mother. I think that's why he's taking care of her. But then also, I didn't tear up during this part, I swear. But like at the very end of the film, before Neil takes off to, be his heroic self, Neil's like, for me, I think this is the end of a beautiful friendship. And then our protagonist is like, but for me, it's just the beginning.
Fucking Casablanca there.
I know. And then Neil is like, we get into some fun stuff. You're going to love it. And I think the very end of the film then is protagonist is going to be watching over Kat and her son. And I think that's the beginning of their bond then is moving forward after this film.
Not only the beginning of their friendship, because we also then see that Neil has been working in the background of this entire thing, even within that first sequence, because Neil is that masked guy with the backpack with the lanyard on it that saves the protagonist right in the beginning at the opera house. And so what the protagonist then has been doing is not only protecting Kat, but also grooming Neil while he grows up, because like he said, we've been through many adventures together. We've gone through this for many, many years. He's been grooming him in his entire life to then meet the past version of himself.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of hints to it. I mean, I think I was reading Robert Pattinson's character dyed his hair for this film, which was the only character who did that, by the way. And there's some meaning behind that, obviously. Some other hints I was looking into a little bit afterwards is I think it's Max could be short for Maximilian. Neil's at the end of that. Also, Neil's Britishness is like dialed up to 100 here. But I think what did it for me, what really cemented it for me, is there's that other, I think it's a language that it's very hinted at that Sador speaks, that Neil understands.
It's the reverse language, yeah.
Yes, which he understands. And I think for me, that was the key to completely unlocking my belief that Max is Neil in this story. And, I think Christopher Nolan had an interview where he was kind of talking about one of the characters has a lot more going on than we really see on the surface level. He didn't, expressly say that was the character, but I think that's who he's referring to when he was talking about that in that interview. So I'm fully on board with this fan theory.
What character do we really connect with on a more personal level? It's not the protagonist. It's not the main person of the story. It is Neil, because Neil has the biggest backstory of the entire film. And the reason he has such a big backstory is because we've seen him many times in the film as different people, as different versions of himself, and we've seen him as the young version of himself being Max. So I'm pretty sure it is not a fan theory. I'm pretty sure that's what Christopher Nolan meant from the beginning.
I am a believer in the fact that was meant to be there. And I think it is cool because I don't know, I like to think like it just sets it up for, that ending scene with Neil and with the protagonist. It does set it up for possible futures I don't know, just like in the, of a sequel.
Not only just a sequel, but what was so interesting was, and I forget completely that other third guy's name, that was the military guy, but he actually at the end, when they're there together, they divide the algorithm up into 3 parts, and each person is supposed to go to their grave with it, and he makes this pact and says, guys, we just need to go to a point in history and kill ourselves. And the reason that Neil is, the protagonist is definitely for it, because we've seen from the beginning he will do what it takes to protect the ideals he stands for, because he takes the cyanide pill at the beginning. But the reason that Neil is so against it, and why he kind of brings the protagonist to be against doing that, is because Neil knows that if he kills himself, then the past version of himself ceases to exist. He ends up not helping out in all the previous versions of himself. He ends up not saving the protagonist by getting shot. If he kills himself, and if the protagonist kills himself, the whole movie being able to steal time and to save the future wouldn't happen if they actually followed that plan and went and off themselves somewhere in the past.
Right. My one question, I guess, after this film is, what happened to Neil's piece if he went and got killed there?
All they have to do to save time is go to some point in the past and simply leave it, like hide it somewhere in the past. Because if they hide it somewhere in the past, and then they also destroy the rest of the machines that are going to reverse the entropy, which they do, so they don't have to kill themselves. They just have to reverse those pieces and then destroy the machines. That's it.
So Neil just had to go reverse somewhere, get rid of that thing, then jump back in and sacrifice himself, basically.
I believe Neil tosses his piece to the protagonist before heading out, I believe. Is that correct? Yes. So he leaves it to the protagonist to deal with. I think one of the broader ideas that I found, because as you continue to understand it, as the film progresses, like you're trying to understand all these small complexities, but then they also bring up this broader idea of, the grandfather paradox. Like, if I traveled back in time and killed my grandpa, would I still be alive in the future? Do I still exist? And so I think that was interesting, because then the entire time, they're sending people back from the future to destroy the present so that the future can continue to exist. So they obviously believe that in that theory that, yes, you can exist if traveling back in time and killing everybody. But I just thought that was interesting. And then how you're, it's like, if everything's happening still and it's existing, then were they successful, or, they couldn't be successful then? And so it's just, you just kind of have a lot going on in your mind. And I thought that was an interesting another level to it.
So with that really brings us to the end of the synopsis. I want to open this up to you guys. If you have any other thoughts, any other notes on the movie before we get into kind of our reviews. But if there's any last points you want to have us discuss, the floor is yours.
I think I just had one that we haven't talked about yet, but it's just referring to Kat. I know she's a side character really in this story, and I didn't really like her character until about halfway through the film. I was like, oh, okay, I'm actually really, I'm feeling bad for her. But I thought it was really kind of a beautiful, her ending the story was kind of a beautiful ending, because as we find out early in the film, she sees this woman diving off the boat, and she's like, I wish, and was so jealous of that woman, because I wish that could be me. And it is her. And I thought that was just very beautiful storytelling, to be honest with you.
This was the scene that got me, was when she finally realized that it was her the entire time. I was like, that was, to me, the most poignant moment of the movie, because she realized she had seen herself. And that's also, I think she didn't realize that was her. I think what the audience was supposed to believe was that she didn't realize it was her until that moment that she saw herself in the boat. But I actually think it was a little bit before that. It was the moment she started taking the chain kind of off of the boat, getting ready, kind of putting the sunscreen down. That was the moment that she knew that it was actually her, and not later when she finally saw herself. So this brings us to the final part of the episode, where I want to kind of get your guys' final, not just thoughts, but get your thoughts and kind of reviews. I mean, we don't do, as you guys know, we don't do like a 5-star system here, but just kind of your final thoughts, what you thought of the movie, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, what you liked, what you didn't like, all that kind of stuff.
This is probably the most confusing movie I've ever watched. I waited a long time to watch it and was very strict on avoiding all spoilers as much as possible for this. But this was the movie I was looking forward to the most that actually came out this year. And I think it definitely lived up to my expectations. Absolutely. Christopher Nolan is a master storyteller. And like I was saying, like, this is the most confusing movie I've ever seen, probably, but I loved every second of it. And I'm very excited to watch it again.
I really knew nothing about it going into the viewing experience. And to me, I guess, like, I always enjoy movies. Normally not someone to rewatch a movie unless it's been quite a significant amount of time since my last viewing. So I just consider this such a piece of pure art in the fact that I could sit down the next day, rewatch it, pick up on so many new things, just more understanding, more layers, I just think it's just such a piece of art. And I think that's so cool that he's able to keep people engaged through not only the first and second viewing, but even after that. I just think that's so cool. So definitely highly recommend. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And my final thoughts on it are exactly, I mean, what you guys say and more. This goes down in the top 10, if not top 5 of my movies of all time, and just goes to solidify the fact that Christopher Nolan is my favorite writer director out there, because it is, just like I've been saying, such a masterpiece of a film. It's a film I will put, and I'm not the biggest fan of French New Wave film, but in the way that French New Wave films are films that you have to watch over and over and over, this is that film that I am going to watch over and over and over, and you will not understand it the first time through in its entirety. And a movie doesn't do that for me. I've come to a point in my movie career and in my watching of and being a fan of movies that things don't surprise me. I can spot a plot twist from a mile away. And this is one of the first films I've ever seen, especially in my recent years, that genuinely surprised me. It had me questioning every single little piece the entire time, and I didn't even understand what was going on till the last second of the film, and it tied it all together. And it doesn't, like, I'm almost mad at it for doing that, but at the same time, I'm so happy that there is a film out there that will make me come back to it and still question my thoughts about it. I mean, in my 5th or 6th time watching it, I may have a complete different idea, and we may have to record this podcast all over again because I may have different thoughts. But that's what I love about this film, and why I highly recommend everybody to go watch it. It is worth, right now, it's like $19.99, $20 on pretty much everywhere you can get it. But whether you can finally see it when it comes out for less to rent it or buy it, I would say buying it is worth every single penny and more. If this were only going to be in theaters for like months to come, I would go see it 5 or 6 times and pay that $20 each time, because it is worth it. It was worth the wait. I did the same thing as you, Chris, where I didn't go to see it in theaters because of COVID, but it was well worth the wait. And I would say the best movie coming out of COVID. I mean, that's not saying a lot, but it was definitely a good change of pace and a good, like, get me out of the COVID mindset and get me thinking about movies again. So thank you guys so much for coming on. As we get out of this, I just want to give you guys a chance to, or not to, kind of give your guys a shout out, plug your socials if you have them, or not. That's totally fine. Chris, we've heard it from you many times already, but I always want to give you the chance to plug your stuff because I love what you're doing.
Thanks, man. Yeah, if you guys want to do some photo shoots together, would love to collaborate with you, make some art. You can find me on Instagram, message me on there. My username is a little bit long, but it's going to be christophers.snap. shots. And then just shout out to my brother. I know many of you guys don't know this, but right now he is a COVID nurse. He's been battling this thing on the front lines for almost a year now, and just really grateful for him, everything he does, and that he's able to join us today and just kick it back a little bit and relax and talk about a movie.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me today. It was a lot of fun chatting, and I'm glad I got to be here. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I wanted to also second what Chris said in thanking you, not only you, but all the rest of the frontline workers out there. My dad is one who is working in the medical industry as well. And we cannot thank you all enough for all of the work that you have done and continue to do as we continue to battle COVID. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And with that, you guys can follow me on Instagram at nick.fleeto.leach and just Nick Leach on Facebook. And absolutely please join the Cinema Club Facebook group at facebook.com/group/the Cinema Club TCC, and listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Podbean, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. So as always, thank you again for listening, and we will see you on the next one.